I'm Andy with Sunrunner. Today we're going to take a look at replacing belts on mid-90s. Well, I mean, this is pretty much applicable to all Subarus that have the boxer engine. So Legacies throughout the 90s and up into the 2000s, Outbacks, Foresters, would all be applicable to this procedure. What we're looking for is when you see a belt like this, you don't want to run it too long. This belt, having the cracks like this, is about the end of its service life. You know, we don't want a belt like this to break on the road and leave you stranded. So for this procedure, we're going to use basic tools: a 12mm angled box end wrench, a 12mm socket, a 10mm socket, a short extension, and a 3/8 ratchet. Okay, when you're experiencing a bad drive belt, say if you start your car in the morning and you have a bad squeal coming from your engine, or say you turn your AC on and you get a squeal from your belt from that, there are a number of different reasons that a belt could squeal. There are different loads that are put on engines that can make the belt squeal if it's becoming loose or if it's becoming worn. So what you're going to look at is the front side of the engine right here. Behind the radiator, this is your radiator right here. Your drive belts run right down the front of the engine here. They run your AC compressor on the right, your power steering pump on the left, and your alternator is in the center. All of these are very vital for, well, I guess the AC pump obviously isn't vital for the engine, but it is vital if you want to stay comfortable in your car. Your power steering pump is what allows you to turn your wheels very easily, and the alternator is extremely vital to keeping your battery charged and overall health and running of the car. All right, we'll start with the alternator belt because that's the outermost belt. You have to take that one off to get to the AC belt anyway. So we're going to start with our 10mm socket and the short extension. You don't really need the short extension, but for sake of knuckles and doing it easily, we're going to use it anyway. We're going to take this first bolt off, this cover here. And there's going to be this bolt and this bolt for this cover. I'm just going to set these right here. If you do set them on the battery, be sure not to set them on this side near the terminals. I've seen them arc before and it's not pretty. We're going to switch to our 12mm socket for this bolt here. This bolt is the pivot bolt for the alternator, but it also holds this cover in right here, as you can see. Just loosen that up a bit. You don't need to take it out all the way. And that comes off just like that. We're going to set that up there. Now you have access to all the belts on the top side and the bottom. I'm going to bend the belt up a little bit right here. This is a bolt for the tensioner on the alternator. It's what finalizes this belt's tension. A lot of people, we get a lot of complaints and have had to replace this bolt a lot because somebody tried to replace this belt themselves and didn't loosen this bolt. So you always first have to loosen that bolt. Uh-oh, this one's a 13. That's not a factory Subaru bolt. That is a 12mm on most factory applications. This one's obviously been replaced, so give me just a second. Okay, so I've got my socket on it to get that replacement bolt out. Now you don't have to take that one out all the way either, you just have to loosen it up. And then you start spinning backwards on the actual tensioner bolt, and it'll give you release the tension on that belt. Now for some people that struggle with the lefty-loosey, righty-tighty concept, believe me, I'm one of you, I've found it easier to remember that loosening is counterclockwise and tightening is clockwise. That's just easier for me. So with that loose, You push down on the alternator there a little bit, and that belt should be able to come off. This belt is a good one. There are no cracks in it. It's pretty much brand new, so that's what you should expect to see from even a belt that's got maybe upwards of 60,000 miles on it. We've seen them fail, you know, later than that, sooner than that, but generally not from regular service use. So we can set that aside for now. And then there is another bolt down here on the bottom of this tensioner. We'll get a better angle on that here in just a second. This is the bolt that we need to focus on for loosening the tensioner. Again, it's the one that finalizes, that holds this tensioner pulley in place so that after this tensioner bolt is tight, it can't move. So that's where we'll take our 12 mil angled wrench and we're going to loosen that up just a little bit, because again, it doesn't need to be loose completely, it doesn't need to be taken off, just needs to be loosened. Some applications, some newer 2000 Outback applications, this distance between this tensioner and the fan can be very, very tight. So sometimes an angled wrench like this won't work. You'll need just a regular wrench, or if you've got some other sort of low profile special 12 millimeter, that'll do just fine. And then we'll loosen up this tensioner bolt right here. Go a little more. Sometimes these bolts can be a little rusty. Sometimes some PB Blaster or WD-40 penetrant helps. And you just need to loosen it enough to get that belt off. Again, this belt is not very cracked. It's actually pretty new, so we're going to leave it. It's just fine. You know, we've inspected it. We can put it right back on and call it good. Okay, we're going to put our belt back on now. It's easiest, you always got to start with the AC first because it sits behind the alternator belt. So we're going to go down around the crank pulley and inside this bracket for the tensioner. If you don't get it inside that bracket first, you won't be able to get it on all the way. So we're going to get our belt on there, and then we'll start tightening that tensioner pulley down. Now, you generally don't want to use power tools for this process because it's really easy to get these bolts too tight and either cause damage to the bearing in this tensioner pulley down here or the bearing in the AC pulley. On other applications, I've seen it get so far as to tear the crank pulley off the keyway. So it can do a lot to really damage your car. You don't want to over tighten these belts. Once you start feeling some resistance on that belt, you want to check your tension on it. Easily, you don't want more than a ½ an inch of play from where it's straight right here down. So we're a little over ½ an inch right now. Another way to check is you don't want to be able to really twist it more than halfway. So, you know, you can see we can go quite a bit further than that. So we're going to put some more tension on it. We need the ratchet for that. Give her a few and then check it again. We're getting a little better there. The thing with these Subarus and this particular belt is there's a pretty long expanse and gap here. So the short one down here, you're obviously not going to get as much twist on. I know it's a little difficult to see there, but the longest expanse on any belt, on any application you're working on, is what you want to check. So we're we're getting pretty much there. We don't want to go a whole lot tighter than that. From there, we're going to come down here and tighten this belt bolt down here for the tensioner to lock it in place. We've had a lot of customers come in with a bad bearing here or with a wobbling pulley that has worn into the timing cover back here because this bolt didn't get tightened down all the way. And it's not a matter of getting it super tight, because you can strip it off real easy, but it needs to be snug. So there you go. There's your AC belt. Alright, now we're going to install our alternator and power steering belt. Again, this one was good, and it should do nicely for the service life of this car. There's no real particular rhyme or reason to how you have to put this belt on. It goes on fairly easily no matter where you start. Just want to make sure that it's on square on all the pulleys, and then we can tension that alternator a little bit. A little wild with my ratchet, I guess. Now on this particular system, you want to go again off the longest expanse, which is between the alternator belt and the crank, or alternator pulley and crank pulley down here. So we don't want much more than a ½ inch of play from it being square and pushing in on it. And we don't want to be able to rotate it much more than a half of a turn. So we're almost there. We're going to go just a little more. Yep, we're there. Now we can tighten this tensioner lock down here, but do not tighten this one yet. 13. Again, get these bolts good and tight, but not over tight. If you're using a short 3/8 ratchet, you shouldn't really be able to over tighten them unless you're really wrenching on it and with a breaker bar or something. That should do just fine. Before we continue with this bolt, we need to put our cover back on because it goes between these washers right here. You want to pull the small washer to the outside and leave the big one on the inside as a bushing there. And then that goes on just like that. And you'll probably always want to start with this little 10 here first before you lock this down. Sometimes it can cause it to flip up while you're trying to tighten it down, and it's kind of a pain. So for the sake of ease, we'll put that one in there first. And then we can tighten that bolt. That's one cover. And then we'll set our other little cover here. All these top bolts and nuts on this top cover are 10 millimeters. So we'll switch to our 10 and make sure that this is tight. That's good and tight. And that's good and tight. And there you've just checked and thoroughly maintained the belt system on your Subaru.